Hello, welcome into another episode of the Healing Anxious Attachment podcast. My name is Johanna, and I am the host of this podcast. So, I've been excited to make this episode for a while because something I mentioned a few episodes back was a quiz that I created to help you uncover your specific type of anxious attachment. And so, I want to be really clear about this, but I'm sure you're already following because you're this far in the podcast, especially if you're listening in order. There are different attachment styles. Anxious attachment is one of them, but within the anxious attachment, there are different subcategories. And I literally cannot believe no one is talking about this because it's just so obvious to me that there's no way that your attachment style or your anxious attachment style, if you're someone who has a dominant fawn response, for example, could be the same as someone's anxious attachment style and experience and coping mechanisms as someone who has a dominant fight response. So there has to be subcategories within the anxious attachment category. And I think once you know your subcategory, it will undoubtedly help you choose the healing strategies that actually make sense for you and your system. So in this episode, I'm going to talk about the birth of this idea, how the archetypes came to life, why it's important, the bigger picture of the role the nervous system plays, talking a little bit about triggers and survival responses, and then I'm going to explain each of the 4 different types. Of course, you're willing to go take the quiz right now through the link in the show notes, or you can take it at the end once you've sort of heard the overview. You might already have an idea of which type you think you are. And even better, once you take the quiz, not only are you going to find out which type you are, I also created a mini training video for each type that teaches you more about that type and what your specific strategies are and how you can implement that. So there's a lot of support and content available to you around this topic and around the quiz, and it's been such a fun big project for me to create. So let's get into it. Like I said, I can't believe no one else is talking about this. I feel like I have really bridged like a big gap in this space actually, and I hope that it reaches other people. So basically, I saw this because after working with so many women who really identify with anxious attachment, I saw that their healing journey would look quite different depending on how that showed up for them. Some people who have anxious attachment also feel incredibly jealous, and some people don't feel jealousy at all. Some people who have anxious attachment are very, very verbal with their desire for closeness and even to the point of needy or whiny or crossing other people's boundaries, and some people would never be able to speak out a need. So those are already 2 really big extremes, and the more that I got to know people in their process, the more I started to sort of see similarities, and that's what ultimately led me to categorize into 4. And with any of these things, I never want it to be some new identity, right? Because when we identify with someone, with something, and if I start saying I have anxious attachment or I am anxiously attached, it's like I'm fully claiming it, owning it, and therefore it will probably keep perpetuating. So that's why you've heard me try and use terms like anxious attachment tendency or anxious attachment behavior. You, at your core, the core and the truth of who you are, you're not anxious attachment, right? This is just a set of behaviors and coping mechanisms that you've learned over time that we can, of course, unlearn and replace. So now that the quiz has been created and the archetypes have been developed, I've had almost 200 people go through the quiz, and what's helping is what people are noticing is it just helps them understand their unique relationship dynamics better, right? And actually, within my Becoming Secure membership that I know you've heard me talk about, there are different curriculums based on each archetype. So if you're archetype A, the curriculum of the videos that I suggest you watch in the order you watch them in is actually different than in archetype B or C or D, because as I said, these different types need different things, need different support, need different medicine. And as I always say, it's not just about knowing, it's about taking action towards becoming more secure. So we're going to talk about the action steps for each individual type as well. So I'm going to go ahead and dive in and tell you the 4 different archetypes. So we have the sensitive soul, the calm collected overthinker, the affection enthusiast, and the distant dreamer. And I'll give you just a little brief description. So the sensitive soul is someone who's more likely to retreat inward, someone who's probably more overtly shy, or it might be someone who self-sabotages due to really big feelings of fear and rejection and inadequacy. The calm and collected overthinker is someone who might try to outthink their emotions, analyze every detail to feel more in control. It's someone who outward facing, you might see them as a confident person, but internally that world is filled with anxiety and doubt, especially around romantic relationships. The affection enthusiast is someone who might be able to seek reassurance. So they can actually ask for what they need, bordering on demanding what they need, and maybe someone who tends to really, really overgive, sort of in a transactional way. And finally, the distant dreamer is someone who is more likely to distance themselves, to feel a little bit of internal conflict between their sense of independence and having to be open and vulnerable with a partner. This person is also likely a bit more heady, a bit more of a logical or analytical person, and they have relied on independence as a way to protect themselves from vulnerability. So, just after hearing those, you might be able to start to self categorize, or you might resonate with one or two of them, which is totally fine. And as we get into it, what you're going to see is that the triggers, the nervous system responses, and the coping mechanisms are usually what varies in between each type. So, as I said before, attachment patterns are deeply rooted in our nervous system, right? This is a more than anything, it's a body and a trained response to feel anxious or fear or nervousness when we are facing a perceived threat or a real threat of abandonment, rejection, or unworthiness. So that's happening on a nervous system level. And if you try and just explain to your mind, I shouldn't be triggered right now, or why do I feel like he's going to leave when he's sitting right here? It's because you haven't done the nervous system work. You've done the understanding work. Logically, your adult mind and present conscious awareness can see, okay, my partner is in this room. Why do I feel so scared? And it's because there's this pattern of fear that's running in your nervous system. And that has to be accessed also through the body, through the breath, and through the sensations of the body in order to bring safety into the body. So the second layer of this, in terms of where the archetypes differ, is the triggers and the survival responses. So whatever your trigger might be, a partner not texting back, feeling distance in the relationship, is going to activate a survival response in your nervous system. And that is the specific fight, flight, freeze, or fawn responses, which are all driven mostly by this deep fear of disconnection. And what's under the fear of disconnection is usually a feeling of unworthiness, and what's beneath the unworthiness is a fear of being alone. So when we can work to actually connect with those parts of ourselves that are experiencing that fear and have those doubts, that's where we offer the healing. And again, it's through the body. So based on now your nervous system role, your triggers and your survival responses, your coping mechanisms are going to be different. So someone who has a dominant fawn response is probably going to have a very people-pleasing coping mechanism. So when we're in a fawn, we can actively behave. It's not full freeze where there's complete shutdown. It's just this inner collapsing while trying to please or soothe the other person. So we're usually active in our behavior and sometimes can even seem totally normal and totally content doing what we're doing, whatever the people pleasing is, while at the same time it's all actually crossing the boundary of our body or our boundary. And you know this through how your body feels, through the sense of dread, resentment. I don't actually want to do this. I'm bitter that I'm doing this. Why are they making me do this? If any of that is your story, that's a really good indication that your boundary's being crossed. So that's people pleasing is a coping mechanism for this fear of disconnection. Another one might just be acting out, lashing out, pushing someone away, telling them to get away from you. That would be more of a fight response as the dominant response. So let's go through each one in detail, starting with our sensitive soul. So the sensitive soul is going to be a gentle and introspective individual who often feels anxious, nervous, or insecure in most areas of life. So whether it's family, friends, work, or romantic partners, you would feel a sense of insecurity or maybe unworthiness, nervousness, fear that people are watching you, or fear that you're being judged. And so the anxious attachment tendencies for the sensitive soul may show up as frequently worrying about your partner's feelings towards you, fear of judgment, and feeling nervous about being abandoned. And you'd probably notice if you have this type that you often doubt your worth, you feel shy or hesitant in expressing your needs and desires because you're not sure if it's right, or part of you feels like you don't deserve to have it. And if you are this type, then you may have had experiences of doubting your partner's love or doubting their commitment, even in the absence of any, real reason to do that. It might lead you to consistently desire reassurance and validation, although you probably wouldn't be able to ask for it. So you might notice that if they give you validation, it feels very good, it feels very soothing, but you're not able to actually ask for it. So it's sort of like an experience where you're constantly hoping it will happen without doing anything about getting it. And in this case, you may attract or settle for partners that don't treat you right. So big worthiness wound here, and you are certainly not alone. Out of the 200 people that have taken this quiz, I think this is the second most common archetype under anxious attachment. So the sensitive soul is different than, for example, the affection enthusiast, because the sensitive soul is more likely to blame herself for relationship struggles instead of feeling confident in expression or in tune with your needs or desires. So the most important thing for the nervous system of the sensitive soul and for your growth is to build self-worth independently of your relationships or your ability to help people. I'm going to say that again. The most important thing for your nervous system and growth as a sensitive soul is to work to build your self-worth independently of your relationships or your ability to help others. Okay, so independent of that validation that you get as what probably feels like breadcrumbs and never enough from other people, or your ability to just serve and do, it has to come from within. And this starts with the topic of self-soothing, which I talk a lot about, I'm pretty sure in the third or fourth episode. And then building off that, the pillars of self-confidence, self-trust, self-reassurance, reparenting the inner child, all of those tools are going to be paramount for you to come back into connection with yourself. Next, we have the Calm and Collected Overthinker. So the Calm and Collected Overthinker is this highly capable, outwardly confident individual who appears calm, but internally struggles with anxiety in intimate relationships. So you're probably someone who's even a little bit, I don't really want to use the word fiery, but you're like on, like you're capable, you can handle stuff, people know you can handle stuff, you're accountable. Your people pleasing would be like doing stuff for other people, acts of service sort of thing, just getting stuff done. So the anxious attachment tendencies for this type may show up as overanalyzing interactions with your partner or romantic interest or friends, feeling anxious about maintaining someone's interest. So there's a lot of feeling of needing to prove our worth in these relationships and then doubting that our partners think that we're worth it. And the question for us is usually, have I done enough? Am I enough? Have I succeeded enough? Am I at a high enough standard for this person to choose me? And finally, having a fear of being seen as less than perfect. So fear of getting it wrong, fear of being seen as less than perfect, as I said, are going to be big ones for the Calm and Collected Overthinker, because you, she, I want to feel right, want to feel right, want to feel capable, and also be acknowledged for that. So you would probably notice that you do excel in many areas of your life, but find it challenging to apply that same confidence to romantic relationships, especially when it comes to letting someone else take the lead. And usually there's an inner conflict in someone who is the Calm and Collected Overthinker, but has also done some of this inner work already, where she gets stuck between desperately wanting like a masculine man who's strong and who's in his leadership and like takes control and makes decisions, but also being someone who is in her masculine energy and notices her tendencies for control. So this desire to like let go and surrender to life or a man is really high in this type, but there's also sort of a mechanism of needing to be on and worth it and doing something in order to get that, which is actually the exact opposite energy of surrender and receiving, which is the energy that we would need to be in order for someone else to hold the opposite pole in that polarized or polarity dynamic of a man who's very in his masculine. So as the Calm and Collected Overthinker, you may have had the experience of keeping your anxieties hidden behind a bit of a calm facade, sort of being the person who does well under pressure, especially externally. leading others to believe you're always in control, even if you're feeling overwhelmed inside, and handling things on your own, feeling like you need to figure it out on your own. So unlike the affection enthusiast, again, the calm and collected overthinker is more likely to downplay your need for attention, kind of giving this chill girl, I don't need affection, it's okay, whatever happens is fine. He cancels the date, it's not a big deal, like it's whatever. That's kind of the tone. So maintaining this cool, more aloof exterior instead of being able to directly seek the emotional closeness that you crave. You might have challenges with balancing your independence with your need and desire for emotional support, and you may also feel challenged to allow yourself to be vulnerable in front of your partner. So the most important thing for your nervous system as the calm and collected overthinker is going to be to acknowledge and validate these internal anxieties, just letting yourself fall apart a little bit, owning this turmoil or chaos or overwhelm that might feel like you have to constantly be pushing it in the closet. Just let it be there. Let it be there as part of your experience. Practice giving yourself grace and self-acceptance around it. And finally, allowing yourself to be vulnerable and seek someone to hold you to. That is the calm and collected overthinker. So third, we have the affection enthusiast. This one I've been referencing as sort of like what the other two are not. Because the affection enthusiast is someone who actively seeks closeness and attention. This person has basically no problem demanding more time, asking for what they want, walking up to people and hugging them, like reaching for physical touch, reaching for attention, which is different than the first two. So the anxious attachment tendencies for the affection enthusiast may show up as needing frequent reassurance, feeling jealous easily, and becoming outwardly upset when your needs for affection aren't met. So your partner or your romantic interest probably knows when you're not getting the thing that you want. So if this is your type, you probably notice that you thrive on physical closeness and emotional closeness. You just want people close to you. You want to spend a lot of time with them. You want their undivided presence, and that's just where you feel so nourished and loved. You might have challenges with managing feelings of jealousy, dealing with any perceived neglect that they aren't available for you, and balancing your needs for affection with the other person's capacity or need for personal space. Those might be the challenges. So what's important for your nervous system and your growth, if you are the affection enthusiast, is to cultivate self-soothing techniques. That's what I mentioned also as one of the key aspects for the sensitive soul. But the reason that's important here is so that we're not crossing other people's boundaries with our, the word that came to me is pushiness, but it's sort of like, that if you go into someone's arms for a hug, even if they're going to say yes and give it to you, there might be that edge where you notice, I am getting a little annoying to this person. I can sense their energy getting annoyed with me, and that line can easily be crossed by the affection enthusiast. And it's a boundary thing. It's crossing other people's boundaries. So the self-soothing is going to help you feel confident to hold yourself so that you don't need to rely on someone else to feel loved. Second thing for you is building a sense of self-worth independent of your partner's attention and developing healthy communication strategies to express your needs without overwhelming your partner. Generally, the main desire for the affection enthusiast that I work with is wanting to feel more in control of your emotions, feeling secure within your relationship, and feeling confident in yourself in general. So if you take the quiz and you end up with the affection enthusiast, then the training video is going to be filled with information to walk you through some clear strategies for those exact things. Now, finally, we have the distant dreamer. So the distant dreamer is this independent and introspective individual who often appears very emotionally detached, but experiences an inner conflict about closeness and intimacy. So she has a bit of a hard time balancing how much should I let someone in my life? How fast should I let someone in my life? You might get the sense that you don't really trust people super easily, or it takes you have to meet a lot of people before you feel that you meet anyone that you could even consider opening up to. So your anxious attachment tendencies might show up as acting very indifferent to emotional closeness, like, oh, if it's here, that's nice, but you're not going to necessarily lean into it or be like a very snuggly person. Whereas The calm and collected overthinker might. So yeah, I kind of want to explain this with the three of the archetypes that we've talked about. The affection enthusiast would be like, cuddle me, hug me. The calm and collected overthinker wouldn't necessarily ask, but when it's given, she loves it. But the distant dreamer wouldn't ask, and then even if it's given, might be a little bit indifferent to that experience because you don't want to get too excited or too soft about it, basically. The another anxious attachment tendency would maybe be sending mixed signals in dating, so being a little hot and cold and internally feeling conflicted, as I said, between a desire for intimacy but a fear of vulnerability or letting someone get too close. And sometimes there's this underlying sense that they're going to take something from you, or you're basically going to have to owe them a lot of your time. If you have this type, you may have also wondered if you're more avoidant than anxious, because sometimes the default strategy for protecting yourself is to pull away before he does. So unlike the affection enthusiast, as I keep using as the opposite, you're more likely to withdraw and avoid seeking any attention instead of actively pursuing the closeness. And you may have challenges with allowing yourself to be vulnerable, trusting others with your emotions, and balancing your desire for independence with a need for emotional intimacy. So, the most important thing for your nervous system and your growth is to learn to recognize and acknowledge your emotional needs. Sometimes we lean towards this archetype when there's been an experience where your emotional needs just were completely not considered, or basically, I'm getting the image of like bulldozed through in your family environment. So you didn't really have a say, you just had to do what you were told, and maybe there was either a lot of kids in the house or you just had a lot of responsibility as the child, so you didn't have a choice. And now as an adult, you kind of swung the pendulum the other way to feel really like you want to be in control of your resources and your time and your space, because if someone gets too close, then you fear, like your family environment, they're going to take something from you. So, as I said, it's really important to start to learn to recognize and acknowledge what your edges are of your needs, including your emotional needs. And in terms of healing, of course, we're trying to meet our edges and just stretch them a little bit or soften them a little bit, because if these edges right now, as they are more like hard walls that are keeping you from feeling the love and connection that you want, then that's the space to soften. But the more clear you are on recognizing and acknowledging your needs, the more flexibility you'll be able to have and conscious awareness of getting them met, instead of any black and white thinking, which is, what if they take it all away from me? So second in that would be practice opening up gradually to trusted partners. This makes perfect sense for your system. Of course, you're not going to go from being someone slightly reserved to just like letting someone in full on, especially if that is something that happened in the past, or you felt like you had to do it in your early romantic relationships and then it ended up in heartbreak. So gradually opening up and just being discerning to the trust that you give is totally fine. You probably know right now where you feel like you could open up a little bit more with someone, and can you just practice? And finally, finding your healthy balance between independence and intimacy. So again, if you get the distant dreamer on your quiz result, then on that same page, there's going to be this mini training video packed with information that shares these specific strategies for doing that work on a little bit deeper level for the distant dreamer. We've now gone through the 4 types, so let me give you a quick summary. Once again, we have the sensitive soul, which is the pretty shy, unfortunately low self-worth, sensitive to rejection, girly. We have the calm and collected overthinker, who appears calm and confident, but constantly overanalyzes, doubts internally. The affection enthusiast is seeking that validation, asking for it and reaching for it, but may struggle with boundaries. And the distant dreamer desires connection, but also values independence, leading to a bit of a push-pull dynamic. So as I say this, I just want to remind you again that while this might sound a little bit doom and gloom, I just want you to see it as something that you learned to keep you safe, right? So no matter what you were experiencing in early romantic relationships or in your family dynamic growing up, whatever it was, up until this point in your life, you chose these coping mechanisms as your best attempt with what you knew at the time to get you the love that you wanted and to keep you safe. And again, if you're here listening to this, then you've probably realized that you would like to do things another way. At this point, those coping mechanisms just are not cutting it anymore. They're not cultivating the secure, healthy, mature relationship you want. They're not leaving you feeling authentically connected to your confidence and your peace, and that's perfect and beautiful. The fact that you've came to that awareness is exceptional and amazing, and you are walking amongst so many people who are so blind to this playing out for them, and they're blindly going through the loops of pain that maybe you've experienced before. And it's actually quite astonishing to watch. The more you know about it, the more it's like, oh my gosh, when you see other people doing it. But you're here. You are here gaining the awareness and understanding of what's happening so that you can change your experience. And I'm so proud of you for doing that. So your next steps are to just stay on the path, to get yourself the tools to work on bringing it into your body, as I always say, and keep giving yourself grace and self-compassion along the way. That is such a necessary part of this journey. On a subconscious level, we will just never shame ourselves into change. So it really has to come with patience and just remembering that you have been doing your best this far. You've just been making decisions based on the information you have, and now you're getting more information and, even better, more tools to work through these experiences as they happen and to be able to just refine. Like, we can't just turn coal into a diamond with one, quick push. I don't know, maybe they're doing that in like man-made diamonds, but it takes time, right? Like let's imagine you're carving a statue actually. We have to cut away the layers and refine and refine and refine, and that's what this process is more like. It's more like a constant shaping, figuring out what works, what feels good. Oh, that elbow's a little too sharp. Maybe that's where I need to soften. I want this to, you know what I mean. And that's more what this process is like. So I'm going to wrap it up here before I keep rambling on. As I said before, this quiz is linked in the show notes, so find your way to this episode information here below. Take the quiz. It's absolutely free. I know I didn't mention that before. It's absolutely free. Read about your type, watch the video that goes even deeper. All the videos are less than 12 minutes, and you can watch them on 1.5 speed if you really want. And I will see you in the next episode. Thank you so much for being here.